Hey guys, tonight we head back in time, way back to the echoing halls of St. Paul's Cathedral in London on a chilly November night in 1396. The air smells of beeswax and incense, thick and holy. Hundreds of candles flicker against stained glass windows, each flame trying its best not to be swallowed by the Gothic vastness above. The organ rumbles like distant thunder, vibrating up through your shoes. Velvet-draped nobles lean in from carved wooden pews. You, however, are 6 years old, and you are about to become the Queen of England. You're Isabelle of France, daughter of a mad king and a queen who knows how to weaponize a dinner party. Your dress is stiff and embroidered with golden thread. You're wearing a tiny jeweled crown that feels suspiciously like a punishment. It's so heavy it tilts when you walk, and the woman who pinned it on forgot. You still have baby hair. You're terrified. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a geopolitical transaction dressed in lace. At the far end of the aisle stands Richard II is tall, 29, and very much aware of how weird this is. He's wrapped in golden silk. So long it sweeps the stone floor behind him like a sluggish comet. You look up at him and see a man who isn't cruel, just resigned. Historians still argue whether Richard actually wanted this marriage or was pushed into it by the pressures of crumbling authority. Either way, he's here, and so are you. One of you understands why. You walk slowly, one foot in front of the other. You're not nervous for the reasons most brides would be. Your feet hurt. Your crown wobbles, and your arms are too short to adjust anything without knocking over half of your dress. Someone whispers your name with gentle urgency, and you realize you've stopped moving. You move again. This moment is history with perfume on it. The English want peace. The French want money and stability. You are a symbol, a shiny offering. Your presence means a 28-year truce and 800 £2,000 of dowry, enough to fund a kingdom's nap. But that's not your concern. Your concern is staying upright and not tripping on the hem, while the Archbishop of Canterbury moves toward you with a ring the size of a meatball. He kneels. Well, that's good. You're small. You extend your trembling hand, and the ring slides on. It doesn't fit. Of course. It wasn't made for someone whose bedtime is right after sunset. Still, the congregation smiles. Candles flare as if in applause. The choir launches into Latin and French verses that swirl up toward the vaulted ceiling. The whole cathedral sighs with political relief. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't smile. You don't really cry either. You do what children do in places too big and quiet. You shrink. You look for your mother in the crowd, but don't find her. You wonder if you'll see your toys again. The doll you brought with you is back at your chamber. Your little dog, the one that barked when you said goodbye in Paris, didn't make the trip. You remember her whimpering when you kissed her goodbye. The ceremony ends. You are now Queen of England, a child bride, yes, but also a political cornerstone holding up an uneasy peace. Nobody asks how you feel about it. Feelings are for diaries and peasant girls. You are porcelain with royal blood. After the celebration, you're taken back to your quarters. Not to a ballroom. Not to your husband. You're 6. Even medieval norms aren't quite that unhinged. Richard doesn't touch you. He nods politely and retreats. Relieved. You're placed in chambers larger than the house your nurse used to live in. You're given attendants, dolls, rich blankets that smell like lavender and stress. You're bathed and dressed and tucked into bed by people who do not know how to speak your language. They curtsy more than they smile. That night, while the city outside still echoes with torchlight and drunk singing, you stare at the canopy above your bed. It's painted with stars. Not real ones painted. Some of them are crooked. You count them anyway. 1, 2, 3. Then you stop. A realization slips in beside you. You don't know when or if you're going home. Some part of you had thought this was a trip, a visit, that maybe your parents would follow behind in a day or two. But no, they are not coming. You are theirs no longer. You are England's, somewhere below your room, in a hallway lined with polished armor and echoes. English nobles raise goblets and toast a peace they bought with your childhood. One official loudly claims this wedding is a triumph of diplomacy. Another quips that your small size makes it easier to carry royal blood across the channel. Everyone laughs. You don't yet understand irony, but you're about to learn. The next morning, you wake up in satin sheets and forget, for half a second, where you are. You call out in French. Silence. One maid brings you warm milk. Another braids your hair too tight. Your crown sits waiting on a cushioned pedestal across the room. You put it on yourself this time. You don't get much of a choice about being born, and even less about where, in your case. It's the Louvre Palace in Paris, yes. That Louvre, though back then it's more of a castle fortress than an art museum. The walls are cold, the tapestry's thick, and the servants nervous. It's November 9th. What did he explain? And you enter the world under the gaze of courtiers who already wonder what political chess move your life might become. You're the fourth daughter of Charles VI of France and Isabeau of Bavaria, and you're born into chaos wrapped in velvet. Your father, Charles, is known by many names, but the one that sticks is Charles the Mad. He's only 21 when he first loses control, swinging his sword wildly at shadows, trying to kill his own knights. Convinced they're traitors made of fire, historians still argue whether it was schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or just the effects of stress in 14th century medicine, which mostly involved bleeding people until they passed out. One particularly charming episode, your father believes he's made of glass. Not metaphorically, literally. He screams if anyone comes near him, terrified he'll shatter into 1,000 pieces. No one dares touch him. No one. That is, except your mother, and even she keeps gloves on. Your early years are defined by this fragile, terrifying version of royalty. Some days your father knows your name. Other days, he stares past you like you're a ghost. And your mother, Isabeau, she's complicated, ambitious, calculating, more politician than parent. She doesn't cradle you at night or braid your hair. Instead, she's busy collecting lovers and consolidating power while your father stares out windows, whispering to birds that aren't there. You grow up surrounded by murmurs. Servants whisper of Le Roi Fou, the Mad King. Nobles gossip about which advisor will rule next in your father's place. And your mother, well, she doesn't so much rule as she maneuvers. You quickly learn the art of silence. The more invisible you are, the longer you get to stay in the room and listen. By age 3, you understand more Latin phrases than most grown peasants. Not because anyone teaches you out of love, but because knowing what people say when they think you're too young to understand is a survival skill. Your sisters are all being measured for marriage like prized horses at market, and you sense your turn is coming. Here's a quirky detail that doesn't make it into many textbooks. Your mother reportedly had astrological charts drawn up for each child, not to wish them well, but to know which alliances they'd best be sold into. Astrology meets economics in the worst possible way. Meanwhile, France is unraveling. The 100 Years' War with England still drags on. An endless exchange of arrows, egos, and ransom notes. Add to that, a domestic civil war between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. Two French factions who hate each other slightly more than they hate the English. You're smack in the middle of this, born under a chandelier that might fall if someone breathes wrong. You try to play like other children. There's a courtyard in the Louvre where you chase pigeons and pretend you're not hearing your governess argue with your tutor about whether your father just banned sugar because he thinks it's poison. You draw pictures of dogs and unicorns on parchment, while court scribes draft another treaty your mother won't read. Sometimes your father comes back to himself. Those moments are rare and fragile. One time, when you're about 4, he lifts you into his lap and tells you a story about a princess who turned into a swan to escape a monster. You ask if the swan ever comes back. He smiles faintly and says, "Only in the dreams of kind children." You hold onto that memory like it's gold. But mostly, he's gone. And your mother, she's not cruel in the traditional sense. She just doesn't see you. Not as a person. Not as a child. You are, to her, a treaty waiting to happen. And the court knows it. You're spoken of in terms of value, usefulness, and timing. You're 6 when you hear one courtier murmur, "She's the right age for peace." One morning, you wake to find your favorite nursemaid has been dismissed. No explanation. Just a new woman with colder hands and a sharper voice. She dresses you in formal silk. You're not allowed to play that day. You're led to a hall where your mother sits surrounded by advisors. One of them smiles at you like someone sizing up a pastry. This is it. The moment your fate slides quietly onto the negotiation table. England has made an offer. Someone says, as if they're talking about grain. Not your life. You don't understand all the words, but you hear Richard, truce, and dowry. You ask if you'll see your dog again. No one answers. There's something almost comical about the image. Tiny you in a velvet dress, swinging your feet above the floor, while a group of grown men debate whether 6 is too young to be handed across the channel. Spoiler. They decide it's just right. Historians still debate whether your mother hesitated at all. Did she lose sleep? Did she look at your face and feel even a flicker of regret? Probably not. The peace is too valuable. The money too tempting. You are the pawn that could buy 28 years of quiet. At the end of the meeting, You're told you're going on an adventure. To a new castle, someone says cheerfully. With new dolls? No one mentions the cathedral, the candles, the man waiting at the end of the aisle. That night, your mother kisses you once on the forehead. Her lips are cold. Make France proud, she whispers. You don't yet know how often pride and pain travel together. The doll they let you bring has button eyes and a velvet dress with fraying edges. You hold it tight as you sit quietly on a long velvet bench in a room filled with rustling papers and murmured Latin. No one's talking to you, not really, but everyone is talking about you. You're still 6 years old, your feet dangling off the edge, and somewhere between the fireplace and the long oak table, your life is being traded like a very fancy loaf of bread. The men negotiating your marriage look very serious, with their rings, fur-trimmed sleeves, and elaborate facial hair. They smell like cloves, parchment, and old wool. The French side wants money. The English want a truce and legitimacy for Richard II, whose popularity has been melting faster than butter in a summer pantry. You, meanwhile, just want to go back to the garden and play with the geese. One Lord Short, bearded, a little too loud, actually refers to you as a diplomatic gem. That's nice. Gems don't cry. One of your governesses whispers in your ear that this is all very exciting and you're going to be a real queen. You look down at your doll. She doesn't seem impressed. Historians still argue whether Richard II personally requested you, or if it was the idea of his advisors. His first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had died a few years earlier, and her loss gutted him. He loved her fiercely. Some say his court feared his grief was making him soft. Others say he needed a fresh alliance, and quickly. The 100 Years' War had left both England and France exhausted, and nothing says reset button like an expensive political marriage. The Duke of Berry leads the French side. He's crafty, sharp-eyed, and doesn't smile much. He's the one who names the price, an enormous dowry of 800. He doesn't have enough money to fund a small army or bribe a large one. England doesn't blink. For peace and prestige, they'll pay, well, technically they won't pay it all up front. But that part gets left in the fine print. And you're the living receipt. They argue for days, not about whether you should be married off, but whether you're old enough yet. 6 is young, even for 14th century politics. Some English nobles are uncomfortable. Wait until she's 12. One suggests, let the marriage be symbolic now and formal later. But Richard is under pressure. His hold on the throne is slipping. Delay is not an option. He needs the alliance now, not in 6 candlelit birthdays from now. So they push forward. Your wedding will be a name only. They say, and everyone nods as if that makes it fine. Never mind that you barely understand what a wedding even is. You still can't tie your own shoes without help. One French story claims you once asked if there would be cake. Honestly, that's fair. It's a wedding. Cake should be part of it. But no one answers you. As the negotiations drag on, you're dressed and redressed for inspection. Tailors poke at your sleeves. Jewelers bring tiny crowns and bracelets so heavy they feel like punishment. A bishop lays hands on your head and mumbles something about divine favor. Your doll gets ignored in a corner. She looks scandalized. Your farewell is choreographed down to the final curtsy. It's not just a goodbye, it's a show. The Louvre is decorated with flowers and silks. The English ambassadors arrive with a full entourage and expect to be impressed. And oh, are they? Your father, King Charles VI, surprises everyone by attending. He's having one of his lucid days. He takes your hand and blesses you. He even cries. His eyes are glassy, but they recognize you. You don't let go. Not until your mother pries your fingers off. Isabeau, your mother, doesn't cry. She adjusts your sleeves, nods approvingly, and tells you to be brave. Historians still debate if she felt anything real in that moment. Love, guilt, maybe, but mostly, she seems relieved. One daughter secured, one pawn played. You're handed over like treasure. Not just you. Of course, a whole army of nobles and servants comes with you. Your entourage is enormous. You're 6, but your traveling party could staff a minor kingdom. There are cooks, maids, guards, priests, tutors, ladies in waiting, and one very cranky pony. The official documents describe you as delivered unto the kingdom of England under the sacred bonds of truce and matrimony. It sounds noble. It sounds grand. But as the doors close behind you, you clutch your doll a little tighter. You don't know the word for it yet. But what you feel is traded. The ship waiting for you at Calais is enormous. Its sails ripple in the cold wind. Striped in the colors of both nations, you're helped aboard. Cloaked in fox fur and seated on a cushion beside a window, the sea stretches out ahead of you, gray and choppy. The sky matches it. You ask if you'll be allowed to write letters. One kind lady says yes. Another tells you you'll be too busy learning English. You nod politely and say nothing. You decide to keep a diary in your head. The crossing is rough. You're seasick the first night and terrified the second. You wake up crying, but your nursemaid is asleep. Your doll listens. She always listens. When you arrive on English shores, the reception is grand. Towns line up to greet you with flowers and awkwardly pronounced French. Every village tries to outdo the last more ribbons. Bigger feasts, louder trumpets. You smile when they tell you to. You wave like you were taught. You repeat phrases from a scroll your tutor made you memorize. I greet thee with gladness. Peace to our new land. Long live our king. You don't always pronounce the th right. People laugh kindly, some not so kindly. At night, in strange castles that smell like roasted meat and wet stone, you cry quietly. You try not to make a fuss. You were told good queens don't fuss. But your body aches from the road, your head from the noise, and your heart from missing a place that was never very safe but at least was known. You dream about the doll falling into the sea. You wake up gripping her tighter. The road to London stretches long and winding, a patchwork of cobblestones, rutted mud, and half-chewed grass where carts have churned the land into something less like a path and more like a protest. And yet, for you still just 6 years old, it's the longest road in the world. Everywhere you go, someone throws a celebration. Town criers shout your name like they know you personally. Nobles arrange flower-covered arches. Choirs sing in Latin. And entire villages scramble to outdo one another, eager to impress the English court. You, though, you're mostly trying to stay awake and keep your crown from slipping sideways on your head. The procession is absurdly grand. You travel with guards in gleaming armor, ladies in waiting with hair taller than your torso, and food wagons packed with sweetmeats and roasted birds. And of course, your doll, who now has a tiny traveling cloak that someone made from a napkin. As you pass through Canterbury, a group of children your own age runs alongside the procession for a moment. One girl with freckles and bare feet waves at you. She's carrying a dog. You wave back before a maid gently pulls your arm down. Queens, apparently, do not wave at peasants, but you saw her smile, and it was the first real one you've seen in days. At night, you're tucked into enormous feather beds in castle guest rooms that echo when you speak. You whisper to the walls just to hear them answer. The food is rich in strange things like eel pie and almond milk thickened with rosewater. You try to smile when people ask if you like it. You trade it all for simple soup and some quiet. One evening, at a manor house where the floor creaks under every footstep, you overhear a conversation through a half-open door. Two men are arguing about how quickly this marriage had to be arranged. One grumbles that Richard should have waited until you were of age. The other scoffs. The king hasn't time for patience. They don't even lower their voices. You're the object, not the audience. Historians still argue whether Richard was rushed into this union by his counselors or if he pressed for it himself. He was, after all, under enormous pressure to stabilize his reign. His enemies were many. His friends were, let's say, conditional. By the time you reach London, you're a walking paradox, treated like royalty, but talked about like a shipment of silk. You're tired and too polite to scream. Then comes the city. London greets you with trumpets and the smell of coal smoke. It's noisy and busy and vaguely terrifying. You're brought to a palace to rest for one night before the ceremony. But rest is a generous term. People keep coming in and out. Tutors, stylists, cooks, clergy, all making last-minute adjustments. Your gown arrives. It's golden red, encrusted with pearls and far too heavy for your frame. Two maids have to help you move in it. Then, at last, the day arrives. You're woken before dawn. They braid your hair into coils so tight you can't blink without feeling it. Your dress is fastened. Your shoes slipped on. Your face dusted with something that smells like lavender and chalk. Your doll stays behind, wrapped in silk. She doesn't belong at the altar. The procession to St. Paul's Cathedral is silent, except for the organ music that rolls like thunder through the city's stone spine. Inside, the candles flicker as if they know something you don't. The windows gleam in blues and reds. The nobles stand in rows, whispering behind jeweled fans. At the end of the aisle, Richard waits. He doesn't look cruel, just tired. He watches you approach with a face you can't quite read. You wonder if he's scared too. He probably is. The ceremony is long, full of words you don't understand, and hands that gently push you this way and that. When the ring is placed on your finger, it slides around like it's swimming. The Archbishop of Canterbury smiles kindly. You don't smile back. You're too overwhelmed. Later, historians will call this one of the most extravagant royal weddings of the medieval period. The candles alone are said to number in the thousands. Choir from both France and England sing in harmony. Gold tapestries intertwine both nations' crests, lions and lilies, clasped together like hands that don't quite trust each other. A quirky tidbit. The candles used in the cathedral were imported from France, not because England lacked candles, but because your entourage insisted on home wax for the sake of luck. Apparently, even diplomacy has a superstitious streak after the vows are spoken. A collective sigh seems to ripple through the crowd. England and France, enemies for over half a century, have forged a moment of peace. And the price? A child in a golden dress? When the ceremony ends, people cheer, banners wave. You're guided out of the cathedral on tired legs, your crown heavy and itching. You're now Queen of England. Officially, the feast that follows is magnificent. Swans roasted and redressed to look alive. Dishes molded into castles. Minstrels with lutes sing songs in 3 languages. You get your own table, but a maid cuts your food because your hands are shaking. Richard approaches, offers a soft smile, and says something kind. You nod. You don't remember the words, only the way he said them careful. Like you might break, to his credit. He doesn't pretend you're something. You're not. He speaks to you like a person, not a tool. And that, in this world, is rare. After the feast, you're shown to your new rooms in Westminster Palace. They are stunning carved ceilings, painted walls, cushions the size of sheep. You're given tutors, toys, guards, and rules. Many, many rules. A nurse tells you this is your new home. She says it brightly, like it's good news. You look out the window, searching for something familiar. Nothing comes. That night, in your oversized bed, you count the ceiling stars again. This time, they're gilded. You reach for your doll and whisper, "We're queens now." And then you cry. The golden corridors of Westminster Palace glow like polished honey under torchlight, and you newly crowned child queen are allowed to walk them only at set hours, escorted by at least 2 adults and never without gloves. Because gloves, apparently, are dignified. You miss getting dirt under your fingernails. Despite your title, you live like a guest with a long-term invitation. Your chambers are rich in detail. Tapestries depicting knights and dragons, a canopy bed draped in French silk, and more cushions than you can count. But every cushion is too stiff, and every wall too silent. They've built you a kingdom within a kingdom, cocooned, curated, and closed. Richard II visits you often, but he doesn't act like a husband. He sits with you while your tutors ask you to recite Latin phrases. He gives you a book with golden edges and asks if you like birds. You say yes, mostly because he looks like he needs you to say something. He's kind, gentle, even, some would say, awkward. He smells faintly of ink and rose oil, and he dresses like he stepped out of a dream. His robes shimmer. His sleeves are longer than your legs, and he talks about his first wife, Anne, with the kind of soft sorrow that makes adults stare off into space. You don't understand what loss means yet, but you recognize it in his eyes. He treats you less like a bride and more like a daughter, or a fragile guest. You're grateful, but it doesn't stop the loneliness. You begin your lessons: English, embroidery, court etiquette, and music. You're praised for your posture and your memory. You get in trouble for humming during meals. You're 6. You think that's allowed? It's not. The court is both fascinated by and unsettled by you. You're a living reminder of a peace they aren't sure will last. Some treat you like porcelain royalty. Others, mostly older ladies, look at you with something between pity and strategic disinterest. You're a symbol, and symbols don't need sleep or stories or sweets. One night, you ask if you can visit the gardens. They say no, it's raining. And queens don't get muddy. You don't push. You've already learned how far a royal no can stretch. Instead, you retreat to your window and watch the drizzle blur the rose hedges. You whisper to your doll, now dressed in court-appropriate miniature fashion. Maybe next week, historians still debate what Richard's true motivations were during this period. Was he trying to shield you from politics out of kindness, or was he just too preoccupied with keeping his own throne to worry about your transition into English court life? It could be both. Medieval monarchs were good at multitasking, especially when the tasks included keeping their heads attached. A quirky little footnote from this time: Richard commissioned a series of tapestries featuring mythological queens and heroines to decorate your rooms. One depicted a girl who turned into a swan to escape war. You used to sit beneath it, tracing the feathers with your eyes, and wonder if magic counted as treason. You get letters from France, stiff, political things written in your mother's hand, but probably drafted by advisors. They ask if you are well. They remind you to behave. They call you Isabelle, daughter of France, Queen of England, protector of peace. You read them and imagine what your old playroom looks like without you in it. You also start dreaming of returning. Not yet. Not now. But someday, the ladies who serve you start to soften. One tells you stories from her village about talking foxes and invisible kingdoms. Another sneaks you candied violets when no one's looking. You still cry some nights, but you've learned how to do it quietly. Then there's the ritual of presentation. On certain days, you're paraded through court gatherings so that nobles and foreign ambassadors can look at you and say things like, "Her Highness grows taller every week, and a fine figure of peace indeed." You're expected to curtsy just so, smile on cue, and answer scripted questions with pre-approved phrases. You get good at it. Too good. And yet, you are still a child. You name your cloaks after colors that don't exist. Cloud milk, sun hush, dragon moss. You pretend your bedposts are castle towers. And your dolls are guards with very strict policies on who may enter. One guard doll always lets the pet squirrel in, even though you don't have a pet squirrel. Every so often, Richard brings you something from his private library, a story, a sketch, once even a music box. He asks if you miss France. You nod. He doesn't ask again. It's strange. Being treated gently by the man the world sees as your husband. Stranger still to know that, while he's technically the reason you're here, he might also be the only person in this palace who doesn't expect something from you. The court grows used to your presence. The novelty wears off. And that's when the shadows start to grow. Because while you study and sip watered wine and learn to hold a quill correctly, Richard is struggling to keep his throne. The political world outside your chamber spins faster each week. Nobles whisper behind heavy doors. The king's decisions grow unpopular. Rebellion brews like an old stew left on the fire too long. You begin to notice subtle changes. Richard visits less frequently. The guards outside your room seem more alert. There are fewer banquets, more letters, less laughter. You overhear a conversation through the tapestry one night. A servant mutters, "If Richard falls, what happens to the girl?" Another replies, "She'll go back," or disappear. You don't sleep well that night. One morning, a raven lands outside your window. It stays for a long time, watching. Your nurse says it's just a bird. You're not so sure. The ravens keep coming, not just outside your window, but in the corridors of the palace in paintings, in carvings, in the idle gossip of kitchen staff who talk just loud enough for you to overhear. You begin to think of them as messengers, not mystical ones, not magical, just inconveniently honest. They come when things are falling apart. Things are falling apart. You, Queen Isabelle of England, age 7 3/4. Begin to notice the absences first. Fewer lessons, fewer visitors. Your nursemaid whispers more often than she speaks. And the other ladies in waiting now pause in their curtsies with something like hesitation, like they're waiting for news. Or a signal. Richard no longer visits your chambers. At first, you're told he's preoccupied with matters of state. But you're not as naive as they think. You know that state means power. And power means danger. Even your dolls seem to huddle closer together now. The court has changed its flavor. The warm buzz of festivity has curdled into suspicion. Nobles stop smiling with their eyes. Whispers trail behind long cloaks. And always, someone is writing something down. It's around this time you learn a new word, rebellion. Historians still argue about the timeline of Richard II's downfall. Was it inevitable, due to his mishandling of finances and tyranny over the nobility? Or did he fall simply because the winds of loyalty shifted too quickly to Henry Bolingbroke, the man who would become a Henry IV? Either way, Richard's days are numbered. And somewhere in your gut, even at age 8, you feel it. One evening, your dinner arrives late. That's new. The servant's hands tremble as she sets the tray down. You ask if the king is unwell. She looks like she might cry, then says nothing. A week later, your lessons are suspended entirely. No embroidery, no language, no writing. You're told to remain in your chambers until further notice. It's for your safety, says the guard outside your door. He says it gently, but won't meet your eyes. And then, one morning, the sky outside Westminster is dark and wet, and your nursemaid wakes you early with a shaking hand. Dress quickly, she says. We're moving you to where you're not told. They escort you through silent halls, away from the windows, downstairs that smell of damp stone. You clutch your doll, your fingers digging into her velvet torso. No one tells you what's happening. Everyone's moving just a bit too fast, talking just a bit too low. You're taken to another palace, Havering Ottbauer, a countryside retreat, a place with gardens and locked doors. The guards here are kind, but firm. You ask when you'll see Richard again. No one answers. You ask if you've done something wrong. Still no answer. That night, you sit at the window, watching the hedges rustle under gray skies. You press your forehead to the glass and whisper, "Please don't let me be forgotten." And then, the truth arrives slowly, like water soaking through stone. Richard has been captured, Henry Bolingbroke, a cousin and rival, has returned from exile and taken the throne. England has a new king. You are 10 years old, a widow in every sense but the official paperwork. No one says the word murder, not in front of you, but you hear it in the silence. Pontefract Castle, that's where Richard was last seen. They say he died of grief, or sickness, or just faded. But you're old enough to know what happens to deposed kings in locked towers. Historians still debate whether Richard was starved, stabbed, or quietly smothered. There's no grave to visit, only speculation and political convenience. But what no one debates is this: he is gone. And with him, your position. You are no longer Queen of England. You cry that night, not for the politics, not for the crown, but because he was kind to you, and now no one is. A quirky detail that emerges years later. Someone in the court secretly made a wooden carving of you and Richard together smiling, seated under a rose trellis. It's found decades later in a storage room. Its paint cracked, its expressions eerily tender. No one knows who made it, or why. Back at Havering, the new king, Henry IV, faces his own dilemma. What to do with you? You're a child. You have no heir. The marriage was never consummated, and the dowry already spent. Sending you back to France would be a diplomatic embarrassment. But keeping you feels dangerous, too, like storing a lit candle near a pile of kindling. So you are kept, not imprisoned, not officially, but you are not free. You may not write without approval. You may not leave without escort. The tapestries in your room are faded copies of the ones you once knew. The dolls are still yours, but somehow they look smaller now. You begin to write letters, to your father when he is lucid, to your mother when she responds. You use formal language because you've been taught it, but sometimes the desperation seeps through. I am kept here like a prisoner. One letter reads, far from all I love, without hope of return. One of your tutors sneaks you paper when no one is looking. You draw a picture of yourself as a bird, wings outstretched, crown falling. In time, whispers from across the channel reach you. Your father has demanded your return. One of his rare moments of clarity. He insists. France applies pressure. England hesitates. But finally, after years in a gilded cage, the doors creak open. They tell you you're going home. You should feel joy, relief, but all you feel is tired. Because you're not the same girl who left at 6. You're 10 now. And already, you've lived a life that would exhaust a queen. When they tell you it's time to return to France, you expect trumpets. You imagine the same pomp that brought you here. The processions, the flowers, the people shouting your name in half-wrong French. But the departure is quieter. There are no grand farewells, no embroidered banners. Just a cart with high sides, a guard who doesn't smile, and a small wooden chest holding your remaining belongings, dolls, letters, and a few gowns you've outgrown but can't let go. You don't even wear a crown. The trip back is rougher than the one here. The roads are muddier, the sea's angrier, or maybe it's just you, seeing everything with eyes that no longer belong to a child. You're taller now, a little quieter. You don't cry when you miss a meal. You don't ask if there'll be music when you arrive. The Channel crossing feels different this time. On the way to England, it was all newness and noise, powdered sugar and paper smiles. Now, it's fog and silence and the heavy weight of almost belonging nowhere. Historians still argue whether the English returned you willingly or were diplomatically cornered by France. Some claim Henry IV hoped to use you as leverage for future negotiations. Others say keeping you after Richard's death had become politically awkward, even dangerous. Either way, you're handed over not like a queen, but like an unresolved issue. The French court greets you with obligatory warmth. Courtiers line up to kiss your hand. Nobles murmur about your grace and maturity. Your mother offers a single, cool embrace. No tears, no lingering touch. She tells you, you have done your duty well. You don't know what to say to that. Because what duty? Really, did you choose your father? Charles VI is having a rare lucid day when you arrive at the Louvre. He smiles weakly, eyes clouded but tender. He recognizes you. He reaches out. You lean into his touch, just for a moment. It's the first time in years someone has touched you without expectation. But the moment doesn't last. You're not a daughter anymore. Not really. You're a symbol returned. And not everyone is happy to see you. France is still in chaos. The 100 Years' War rages on, simmering in the background like an infected wound. The civil conflict between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians has only deepened. The court is even more divided than when you left. Loyalties are traded faster than coin. And you're not seen as French anymore. You're la petite Anglaise, the English girl. One of the duchesses says it out loud at a dinner. Not cruelly, just offhandedly, like a joke. You smile and excuse yourself. You've gotten good at smiling and leaving. You're given rooms in the palace, smaller than before, less golden, less warm. Your possessions arrive late. Some are missing. Your doll is intact, though her dress is torn. You sew it yourself. Your schedule resumes language, music, embroidery, but now everything feels slower. Tired. Like the court doesn't quite know what to do with you. You're 12, technically still a princess, technically still valuable, but you've already been married, already been widowed. In a world of chess pieces, no one wants to pick up one that's already been played. You walk the gardens alone. Not always, but often. A few ladies try to befriend you, but your replies are short. You're not rude, just guarded. You've seen how quickly people disappear from courts like this. You've learned that kindness is often the first step toward disappointment. A quirky little tale floats through the palace servants that you sleep with your wedding ring from Richard around your neck, on a ribbon. No one knows if it's true. You don't confirm it. But some tiny, ridiculous things are too sacred to explain. Occasionally, you're invited to court events. You go, you wear what you're told. You smile. You dance, if asked. But no one lingers with you. Suitors are introduced, but always dismissed. You're too political, too young and somehow too old. Too much of a reminder of a treaty that cost more than it gave. You overhear a lord one night, sipping wine by the fire. The English girl's no use to us now. Let her retire to a convent or find a second match. You don't react. You're used to this by now, people speaking of your life as if it's theirs to mold. Historians still wonder why it took so long for your second marriage to be arranged. Was it strategy? Delay? Indifference? Maybe all of the above. But in the meantime, you simply wait. You take up reading. You write poetry in secret. You start drawing again. Mostly birds. Always birds. Flying. Resting. Sometimes wingless. And once, in a fit of quiet rebellion, you sneak out of the palace garden and buy a single honey cake from a street vendor. You eat it behind a wall, giggling into your sleeve like a girl who almost forgot she used to laugh. You don't go back to that vendor again. But for a moment, it felt like yours. More letters come. Some from nobles. Some from clerics. Most go unanswered. But then, one day, your mother enters your chamber with a look that you've come to recognize. It's the expression of someone holding a sealed envelope that's going to change your life. There's a new proposal, she says. You nod. You're 12. You knew it was coming. This time, they say it will be different. At 16, you are no longer the wide-eyed girl in golden silks being paraded down the aisle like a sacrificial dove. You've grown into your crown-shaped scars. You've memorized the language of diplomacy, the tilt of a head, the length of a pause, the way a word like alliance can mean anything from partnership to polite captivity. But when your mother brings you the name, something in you flinches. Charles of Orléans, a nobleman, a poet, a boy not so much older than you, barely 15. He has ink on his fingers, verses in his head, and reportedly more interest in metaphors than in military campaigns. The court whispers that he's sensitive. The priests whisper that he's soft. Your mother doesn't whisper anything. She just says, the match is secure. Historians still argue whether it was love at first sight. That's a heavy phrase for two teenagers trained to expect obligation at every turn. But when you meet Charles for the first time, there's something strange in the air. He bows too deeply, stumbles on his words, and blushes when he speaks. You laugh genuinely, not out of politeness. He looks up, surprised, then laughs too. You haven't laughed like that in years? The engagement is swift. The court is eager to secure the union between your Bavarian blood and the Valois-Orléans line. You, for once, don't resist. Not because you're giving up, but because for the first time in your life, the future doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like, maybe, a quirky fact that never makes it into the official ledgers. Charles gives you a ring carved from wood, along with the official one. He says it's a token of everyday loyalty. You wear it on a cord around your neck, under your gowns. The wedding is modest by royal standards. The French court, after years of war and inner turmoil, can't stomach more extravagance. But you don't mind. You walk to the altar on your own. No shaking hands. No oversized crown. You meet Charles's eyes and see someone who, like you, was born into duty but dreams of poetry instead. Afterward, he writes you a verse. If my soul had a language, it would speak in your footsteps. You tell him it's a bit much. He tells you that's how he writes everything. You laugh again. You're moved to the Château de Blois, a place far from the political venom of Paris. It's not a palace, it's a home. You learn to walk its gardens at dawn, when the mist clings to the roses and the air is quiet enough to hear birds arguing in the hedges. You and Charles develop a rhythm, and as he writes, you paint, he reads aloud. You correct his pronunciation. You tease each other. You dine late. You speak of things not attached to thrones. And the best part, no one rushes you. Historians love to ask if the marriage was consummated right away, as if that's the only measure of success. But for you, the success was in something smaller. Trust, space, time. Charles teaches you chess, and you beat him often. He claims to let you win. You don't believe him. One afternoon, he presents you with a poem about swans. You ask if it's about you. He says no, it's about fear. You understand exactly what he means. The court still writes letters. They still expect updates, heirs, useful outcomes. But for a while, you live outside that. You become people, not just positions. A rarity. A peaceful year follows. 1 year where you begin to dream in color again. But the world, as always, has other plans. In 1407, you and Charles travel briefly to Paris for a family visit and a few formal duties. It feels stiff and unwelcoming. The nobles are restless. The city is tense. Then, like the sound of shattering glass, the Battle of Agincourt changes everything. Your husband is captured by the English, and the irony is almost too bitter to swallow. The same kingdom that took your childhood now takes your love. Charles is taken prisoner. Not for a week. Not for a month, but for decades. He's only a teenager when he's dragged across the channel in chains. He'll grow old in English captivity, writing poems from stone rooms while you wait on the other side of the sea. At first, you expect him back. You count days. Then weeks. You ask for updates. Messages arrive. Stiff and vague. Well cared for. Health is stable. Awaiting negotiation. You write letters. Dozens of them. Some are returned unopened. You ask the court for support. They promise they're working on it. But in the shuffle of politics, your husband becomes a piece they're not quite sure how to play. You return to Blois alone. And once again, you're a wife with no husband. A queen with no court. A girl with too many windows and too few voices. You start walking early in the mornings again. This time with no one to tease your thoughts into laughter. You return to your paints, your poetry. You find Charles's old verses and memorize them like prayers. You try not to hope, but every night, before you sleep, you whisper the same thing. Come back. You return to the Louvre. But it isn't really a return. It's more like being shelved. A familiar palace. Yes, but not the same rooms. Not the same people. Not the same you. The walls seem taller. The corridors colder. The smiles thinner. The whispers come back too. She's unlucky. She cursed the English king and lost her own. First Richard, now Charles. You learn to tune them out. You've done it before. At 17, you're a wife again, but also a widow again, emotionally this time. And what's worse, nobody seems to know what to do with you. You have no child, no role, no more weddings planned. Your existence is a reminder of war, loss, and everything that doesn't work out neatly in political planning. Still, you try to live. You rise with the sun. You sit by windows for hours. You listen to servants gossip and pretend not to hear when they mention your name. You write, not love letters now, but letters to yourself. Some are angry. Some are poems. Some are just ink spirals across parchment. Historians still debate whether you were allowed to participate in political discussions during this period. Official records say nothing, but one chambermaid writes, years later, that Madame Isabelle advised the Queen Mother on at least 3 delicate matters. So maybe you did. Maybe you spoke. And maybe for once, someone actually listened. Your mother, now older and grayer but still unblinking, visits you infrequently. She doesn't ask about Charles. She talks of alliances, of your younger relatives, of loyalty. You nod in all the right places. Then, one day, she mentions something that makes your chest freeze mid-breath. We may have to betroth your niece to an English prince. It would be good for France. You don't scream. You don't shout. You just say, she's 10. Your mother replies, then it is time she began. You walk away before the conversation ends. That's new. And so you live quietly in your borrowed rooms. Not quite royalty. Not quite exile. Somewhere between ghost and artifact. People bow to you still. But it feels more like habit than reverence. You're young, but in a world that treats women like property, youth is not a shield. It's an expiration date. There's one thing that anchors you. Your belly grows. And with it, a strange new hope. At 18, you discover you're pregnant. And for the first time in years, something is truly yours. You don't dream of heirs or alliances. You dream of lullabies, of storybooks, of someone who might call you mama and mean it not your grace, not queen, not highness, just mama. The court begins to buzz again, but it's different this time. Not calculating, just curious. Can Isabelle carry? Will the baby survive? Will it be a boy? You hope for a girl. Someone small and sharp and quiet. Someone who asks questions and paints stars on ceilings. You write to Charles. You don't know if the letter will reach him, but you write it anyway. You tell him of your cravings, of your dreams, of the way the baby kicks when certain music plays. He doesn't write back, but you imagine what he would say. If her cry is poetry, she must be ours. You decorate the nursery yourself. You pick lavender as the scent. You choose pale blue for the drapes. You ask for a cradle carved with birds. And when it arrives, you sit beside it for hours, running your fingers over the painted feathers. The midwives warn you to rest more. You try, but your body aches in strange places. And some nights you can't tell if the pressure in your chest is from pregnancy or memory. You talk to your baby constantly. Your father writes sonnets. I used to be a queen. But you don't have to be anything. I will never send you away. But history is not gentle with promises. On a cold morning in 1409, under a sky the color of metal, you give birth to a daughter. You name her Jean. She has perfect tiny fists, dark curls, a yawn that pulls at your heart in ways no crown ever could. But your body is tired. Too tired? You bleed. They try everything herbs, cloths soaked in wine, whispered prayers. But nothing stops the red tide. You drift in and out. You hear crying, then silence, then a lullaby from your own childhood, sung by a nurse you barely remember. They tell you later you held Jean for a few minutes, that you smiled, that you whispered something. No one remembers what. You die at age 20, not on a battlefield, not in exile, not in a royal court surrounded by politics, but in a quiet room with your daughter in your arms. Historians barely notice. One chronicle gives you 2 lines. Another spells your name wrong. You vanish, the way forgotten queens always do, folded into a footnote. But your story isn't over. Not here. Time moves on, as it always does. The court continues its games. The wars continue their drums. And your name begins to fade from lips and ledgers alike. You are not the first queen to vanish between lines of succession and male inheritance. And you won't be the last, but still you were here. Jenner, your daughter, lives. She is raised by your attendants, nestled in a tangle of fragile love and uncertain politics. They call her Petite Reine. Sometimes Little Queen, even though she's not officially anything. Just the child of a captured poet and a forgotten queen. But still, she has your eyes and your silence. Charles, still imprisoned in England, receives news of your death months after it happens. In a letter that survives to this day, he writes only, "The garden is hollow. She was the bloomin', a poet's grief." Folded in rhyme, but real. He remains in captivity for 25 years. His hair grays. His verses darken, and he composes entire volumes behind walls that never echo back. Some scholars say his later poems are filled with guilt that he blames himself for being absent. Historians still argue if Charles truly loved you, or merely loved the idea of love in a world that gave him few real choices. Either way, he never remarries while in prison. Meanwhile, in France, Jeanne grows quietly. She is not paraded like you were. No English truce is brokered with her childhood. Instead, she watches from a window while her aunts and cousins are married off, one by one. Some of them cry, some smile bravely. She simply watches and remembers what they told her about you. You, Isabelle of France, queen at 6, widow at 10, mother at 20, gone before history thought to take a proper breath. The French court eventually forgets to mention your name at all. Your tapestries are replaced, your rooms reassigned. Your miniature crown crafted to fit a child's head is stored away in a chest labeled miscellaneous, a quirky detail that survives. Your doll, the one you brought from France to England and back, is discovered centuries later in a collection of royal artifacts. Still dressed in faded velvet, one button eye missing. The tag reads only, "Belonged to a princess," somewhere in the vast maze of France's royal archives. A scribe comes across your wedding contract and laughs at the dowry. 800,000 pounds. He scoffs. She was barely out of the nursery. Then he moves on. But some remember, your name lingers in footnotes, in whispered stories passed between chambermaids, in the margins of old letters. And in every debate about royal diplomacy, your fate is raised like a quiet hand in the back of the classroom. Remember Isabelle, the girl they sent to stop a war. Historians continue to disagree about your significance. Some say your life was tragic but irrelevant, just one more political marriage in a sea of them. Others argue your story symbolizes the cost of medieval power games, where children became commodities and emotion was an afterthought. But modern readers, viewers, listeners, bedtime travelers like the one you're with tonight, they feel something different. They hear about your tiny crown and your trembling hands. They picture you walking down the cathedral aisle while trying not to trip. They think of you, scared and brave and small, stepping into a role no child should ever have to carry. And they don't forget, you become more than a name. You become a question, a reminder, a warning. Every time someone studies a royal treaty and wonders, who paid the price for this parchment? Your shadow walks across the page. You remind us that history isn't just kings and battles. It's also little girls who whisper to their dolls, boys who write poetry in prison, and mothers who never get to see their child grow up. You are the cost of peace, the price of silence. The girl in the gold dress who stood still while nations shook hands over her head. And though they called you queen and widow and daughter of France, tonight we call you Isabel. You aren't buried in a golden tomb. There are no eternal candles lit for you. No grand mosaic of your face immortalized in stained glass. No annual commemoration by monarchs who owe their crowns to the path you unwillingly paved. Your grave is modest, understated marked, but rarely visited. Fewer than a dozen people attend your funeral. No trumpets, no processions, no legacy claimed in stone. Even your name fades faster than most. The new French queens arrive, radiant and politically fresh. And the court is too busy surviving to look back. The English don't speak of you at all, after all. Your husband's reign ended badly, and you were merely a child when they crowned you. An inconvenient footnote. And yet, somewhere between archives and air, you linger, not in the way kings do with statues and coronation paintings, but in the fragile moments. The pause in a courtier's voice when a child is mentioned in diplomacy. The shiver in a lullaby line that sounds a little too much like loss. Jade, your daughter, grows into a quiet, thoughtful girl. She isn't raised with expectations of grandeur. That's a mercy. Instead, she is taught to read, to sing, and to listen more than speak. She never meets her father. She only knows him through poetry, and she only knows you through whispers. Sometimes, she asks her governess, "What was my mother like?" And the woman answers carefully, "Gentle, say, brave." That's more than many queens are ever remembered for. Historians still debate whether your story matters in the grand scheme of medieval politics. You didn't lead armies. You didn't broker treaties yourself. You didn't write decrees that shifted the balance of Europe. But then again, that was never allowed. Was it? You were the treaty. You were the balance. And that's the strange, sharp irony of it all. For all the chronicles that skip past your name, your life is the scaffolding beneath some of the most significant political moves of your era. Your wedding bought two countries 28 years of peace, or at least a pause. Your silence held the space that swords might have filled. But because you didn't shout, because you didn't rule, because you died before the history books started to care, you're easy to forget. Well, not tonight. A fringe anecdote from a lesser-known 15th century courtier claims that Charles of Orléans, once released from captivity, visited your resting place in secret. The source is questionable. The dates are fuzzy, but the story is persistent. It says he knelt, placed a hand on the stone, and whispered one line, "Je reviens trop tard." I've come back too late. True or not? It sounds like something a poet husband would say. And sometimes, stories tell truths better than facts. You become a symbol in other ways. Two, artists in later centuries paint you not accurately, but tenderly. A young girl in gold, head tilted, gaze uncertain, sometimes with birds, sometimes with a toy crown. In one painting, you hold a quill, though you never wrote anything recorded. But symbols don't have to be literal. They just have to stay. A museum once tried to mount an exhibition on the forgotten queens of Europe. Your name was included, right between Berengaria of Navarre and Catherine of Valois. They displayed a replica of your wedding crown scaled to child size, studded with artificial sapphires. It was placed next to a glass box containing your doll. Visitors lingered at your section longer than expected. Maybe it's because your story reads like a fairy tale told backward. Girl becomes queen. Queen becomes widow. Widow becomes ghost. But instead of ending with happily ever after, you fade into a truth too sharp to ignore. Power comes with a price, and some of us pay before we even understand what we're paying for. You are not remembered for battles or speeches or victories. You are remembered because your life was taken up and worn by others like a cloak. They didn't have to stitch themselves. Every time we talk about child marriage, about royal sacrifice, about the blurred line between diplomacy and cruelty, you are there. A tiny figure in a massive hall, walking toward a golden man in silk, asking no questions because no one offered you answers. They crowned you with candles. They buried you with paperwork, but they didn't erase you. Not completely, because here you are, whispering in the mind of someone listening now, under dimmed lights and the soft hum of their fan, wondering how someone so small could carry so much without breaking. You did break, but you carried it anyway. Your story becomes a prism. Tilt it one way, and it reflects the glow of royal pageantry cathedrals blazing with candlelight, golden gowns stitched by women whose names we never learn, and choirs singing verses no 6-year-old could understand. Tilt it another, and the truth gleams through. A child led down an aisle like livestock, offered up for peace she didn't get to define. And yet, some versions of history try to soften you, make you into a fairy tale. A noble little queen who accepted her fate with grace and quiet heroism. But they forget something essential. You weren't a story. You were a person. And sometimes, being quiet isn't grace. It's survival. Jeanne, your daughter, grows into adolescence watching the older generation shuffle names and alliances across maps. She hears stories of her father through poetry and stories of you only when the grown-ups think she's not listening. She asks questions anyway. Smart ones. Brave ones. The kind that echo after they're spoken. Why was my mother married at 6? Did anyone ask her if she wanted to be queen? Was peace worth her life? The adults offer awkward, well-intended answers. But Jean hears what they don't say. She becomes careful with her curiosity, selective with her trust. But she doesn't stop asking. One day, a lady-in-waiting gives her a worn book of court poems written by Charles of Orléans. Jean flips through it. On one page, there's a marginal note, written in small, faded script, pour celle aux yeux d'ombre, for the one with shadowed eyes. She doesn't know if it refers to you, but she imagines it does. She reads that page twice. You're not entirely forgotten, not entirely lost. Not while your daughter is reading. In the years after your death, other queens rise and fall. Some wield real power. Others decorate courts like vases. Few ever hear your name, but a few do. A young noblewoman named Marguerite of Anjou stumbles across your story while being tutored in dynastic history. The lesson is dry names and dates and treaties, but she pauses when she hears of a girl queen married off for peace. She asks questions. Too many. Probably. Her tutor shifts uncomfortably. Historians will later note that Marguerite, in her own turbulent reign, advocated fiercely for her son's inheritance and, in quieter ways, questioned the nature of the alliances she was asked to support. A coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps the echo of a girl who had no voice. The scholars who examine your brief life often frame you as a symbol of fragility, of politics, of sacrifice. But that word symbol always carries the risk of dehumanizing the person it represents. So let's be clear. You weren't just a symbol. You were a daughter, a sister, a reluctant bride, a grieving child, a mother with hands that trembled when they held something so impossibly small and so wholly yours. You had favorite foods. You hated eel. You preferred the feel of linen over velvet. You once tried to name every pigeon in the palace garden and gave up after 52. You believed, for a time, that your doll could understand you. And when Richard gave you a book of bird illustrations, you didn't care that it was too advanced. You carried it everywhere. A quirky anecdote buried in the pages of a court ledger, dated just before your second wedding claims you once insisted on attending a diplomatic dinner without a chaperone. You were 16. The steward protested. You replied, "If I can be married twice by your rules, surely I can sit through soup." They let you attend. You didn't eat the soup. The details, small as they are, matter because while wars were won and kings were crowned, you were learning how to smile without smiling, how to answer without saying anything, and how to dream without expecting those dreams to last past morning. Jeanne carries that with her. Not the trauma, the strength, the quiet refusal. She grows into her own. She studies music. She finds peace in gardens. She falls in love gently, slowly, on her own terms. It's not a fairy tale. It's a choice. One day, she returns to your grave. She brings violets, not roses. Not lilies, the traditional emblems of royalty, but violets, small and defiant and unassuming. She lays them down, sits beside your marker, and reads one of her father's poems aloud. She doesn't cry, but her voice wavers once, and she lets it, then she whispers something only the stones hear. I remember you, even if they don't. And somewhere, maybe your story settles. Not with trumpets, not with titles, but with love. Jean grows up, but she never quite stops living in your shadow, and oddly, that shadow is warm. Not because your story ended well, it didn't, but because it meant something. Something that people like her are only just beginning to grasp. By the time she reaches adulthood, France has changed again. The 100 Years' War still flickers across borders like an uninvited ghost. Kings come and go. Alliances are tested and traded like borrowed cloaks. But Jean holds her ground not as royalty, not as a pawn, but as a woman who knows where she comes from. You don't guide her, exactly, but you live in her spine. She visits libraries. She asks historians questions they can't quite answer. She finds Richard's name in books, Charles's verses in dusty archives, and your name barely there, like a forgotten ink stain at the corner of the page. But she notices, and she adds a note beside it. My mother, Isabelle of France. That's it. No title, no queen, no widow, just mother. And with that one line, she reclaims you not for kingdoms, but for herself. Historians still argue about Jeanne's role in the shifting structure of French noble families. Was she influential behind the scenes? Did she inherit Charles's literary mind? Or your silent resilience? The records don't say much. But then, the records never said enough about you either. What survives are small acts, ripples. A few years after Jeanne reaches adulthood, a young scribe in a minor court writes a letter mentioning a certain Queen Isabelle who was married too young to live. The tone is wistful, empathetic, almost modern. It doesn't change history, but it proves something survived. Your legacy, it turns out, is like wildflowers, not cultivated in royal gardens, but springing up in cracks no one thought to look at. And then there's Charles, released after 25 years. His face is lined with time and absence. He steps off the boat onto French soil with tired eyes and a stack of poetry notebooks under his arm. He is a stranger in his own country. Now styles have changed, wars have shifted, and many of his friends are dead. But your name is still inside him. In his later poems, you appear more often not as Isabelle the Queen, but as an image, a rhythm, a lost heartbeat. He writes, in a chamber of clouds, she waited, not for me, but for the silence that follows kings. He doesn't remarry for a long time. And when he finally does, it is political, distant, practical. There is no doll-sized wedding crown, no candlelit cathedral, just signatures, obligations, and age, but in his personal papers, filed between notes on state affairs and poetry fragments. There's a dried violet, no label, no context, just pressed quiet. Time goes on. France stumbles toward modernity. England forgets your name entirely. The wars that once needed your body as a shield are settled by men in velvet chairs who've never watched a child walk down an aisle with a ring that won't stay on. The Louvre becomes a museum. The crown jewels are locked behind glass. The rooms you once slept in are redesigned, repainted, renamed. Tour guides mention kings and revolutions. They skip over the girl who once whispered lullabies into a doll's velvet dress, hoping someone would sing them back. But not everyone forgets. In the 1800s, a historian writing about royal alliances includes a footnote about you. It reads, Isabelle of France, Queen of England by marriage at 6, died in childbirth, a life marked by ceremony and sorrow. That's all. 2 sentences. You don't even get your own chapter. But a student reading the footnote writes her own paper. Then another. Then a small article in a niche journal. Then, slowly, a spark. By the 21st century, someone makes a short film about you. It goes viral not for its grandeur, but for its honesty. A 6-year-old girl, trying to hold up a crown twice her size, standing beside a man who looks away out of shame. The world watches. Some cry, others argue in the comments. The cycle continues. You're a trending hashtag. Briefly, then a question on a history quiz, then a character in a novel about forgotten royals, then, once again, silence. But the difference is this time, the silence is knowing. People remember, not the way they remember warriors or kings, but the way we remember sacrifices we didn't witness yet somehow feel. You're a shiver in the candlelight, a story we tell not because it ended well, but because it should have ended differently. That's your real crown. Not the one placed on your head at 6, but the one woven, centuries later, from empathy, the one that can't fall off. Even now, your story keeps slipping through the cracks, because history tends to celebrate the loud, the ones with swords, speeches, or scandal. But you were quiet, compliant, graceful in a way that left no fingerprints. And so, the world almost lost you. Almost. But not quite. Every now and then, someone, usually a young woman, stumbles across your name in an unexpected place. A genealogy chart, a dusty medieval romance, a Wikipedia rabbit hole after midnight. They pause, read, then blink, startled by what they have just learned. Married at 6, widowed at 10. It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense. And that, right there, is where the remembering begins. It starts with a gasp, then a frown, and finally, a soft, quiet ache. The kind of ache that belongs not to a queen, but to a child who never got to just be. Because while you wore golden lace, your heart still beat like any child's, fast and curious and fragile. You still had questions that no one answered, still looked for faces that didn't turn toward you, still whispered goodnight to dolls because they were the only ones who ever stayed. Historians still debate what your real personality was. Were you shy? Clever? Fierce beneath the lace? They debate because no one wrote that part down. No court chronicler cared to ask how the bride felt. They focused on treaties, not tears. But maybe you were all those things. Maybe you were more. Maybe you were the girl who memorized the names of everyone who brushed your hair. The one who gave her food to the scullery cat when no one was looking. The one who turned her back at the altar just briefly, not in rebellion, but in hesitation. A fringe rumor claims you once asked a question just before your wedding began. Is this forever? No one answered you. The truth is, your marriage wasn't forever. Your title wasn't forever. But your story, your real story is. Because it has become a mirror. Every time someone hears it, they tilt it toward themselves. Teachers tell it in classrooms, not just as a case study in medieval politics, but as a prompt. What happens when we make decisions about children instead of for them? Writers reference you in poems about girlhood and exile. You become a metaphor for the lost agency, a symbol for those whose voices were silenced by design. One artist even creates a sculpture life-sized Bruns, a 6-year-old girl in motion. She's stepping forward, looking over her shoulder, not sure if she should keep walking. No crown, just a doll in one hand and her other hand half curled. Uncertain. They call it Isabelle. You are no longer confined to a chapter in someone else's dynasty. You're no longer defined by the men who stood beside you. You are your own page, your own sentence. You are the what if, behind 1,000 quiet questions. What if they'd waited? What if they'd asked? What if someone had listened when you said nothing? Because silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's a scream too polite to raise its voice. And now, your silence speaks to every girl who feels overlooked, to every person who was used and forgotten, to every listener lying in bed right now, wondering why this story hits them harder than they expected. You're not a queen anymore. You're a thread, woven through time, tugged gently by those who feel too small for their own shoes, too burdened by expectations they didn't volunteer for. And still, your story continues. They start asking new questions. Why do we celebrate royal weddings without asking about the child brides behind them? Why do we idolize monarchies without acknowledging the blood and youth they cost? Why do we let stories like yours become background noise in tales of great men? The world may never fully answer those questions, but they'll keep asking them because of you. This is the part of the story where things usually wrap up, where a legacy is proclaimed, lessons are summarized, and the narrator stands beside the tomb of some long-dead monarch and says something noble about history's arc. But yours isn't that kind of story. There is no clear ending for you. Isabelle, not because your life wasn't complete, it was heartbreakingly complete by 20, but because the echoes of your experience ripple so far past the years you lived. You're not a headline. You're a haunting. You're the flinch in a mother's breath when her child is asked to grow up too soon. You're the stillness in a crowded room when a girl is introduced not by her name, but by what others expect her to represent. You're the voice we now strain to hear, between paragraphs and portraits, asking the most human question of all. Do I get to choose? Because that's what your life was missing. Choice. From the cradle to the crown, others chose for you what to wear, who to marry, when to speak, when to smile, when to be silent. And yet, you endured. You loved in the small spaces you were given. You found comfort in dolls and poetry and the quiet kindnesses of those few who saw you as more than a transaction. You became a mother. And even if it was for a moment, you chose to love your daughter. In the end, that may have been your greatest rebellion. Historians still argue over what you symbolize, but they rarely ask what you wanted. And that's the difference between remembrance and justice. So tonight, we reclaim your story not for royalty, not for treaties, not for trivia night, but for you. You were Isabelle, a girl born in a palace, crowned too early, mourned too quietly. But now, you are a story carried gently into the dark by someone listening with open ears. And maybe that's more than a crown ever offered. Because crowns tarnish, but stories, they shine. So here we are. At the end of your journey, our journey with Isabelle. You've walked long candlelit corridors. You've sat beneath painted ceilings, heard choirs echo through cathedrals, and felt the soft scratch of velvet too heavy for tiny shoulders. You've seen how quiet strength takes root in the unlikeliest of places, a little girl's resilience, a widow's grief, a mother's fleeting joy. And now, as the story settles and the world grows still, let it drift with you like a lullaby wrapped in silk. Picture the last candle in that great cathedral slowly flickering down. The room, once grand and full of eyes, now quiet, Only the faint scent of wax and incense lingers, somewhere far off. A bird calls once, and even that sound fades into hush. Imagine Isabel's doll, resting gently on a pillow in a forgotten chamber. Bud and I watching the ceiling as dust dances in the slant of morning light. Feel your breath soften. Let your eyes fall gently closed. Not in sorrow, but in peace. Because her story has been told, not with fanfare, not with marble statues, but with care. And now, it's yours to carry. Softly, kindly. Remembered. Thanks for being here tonight. Sweet dreams.